I hope you can all see the little presentation that I've put in place for you just to guide us through what I'm going to say. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the Better Futures report, the context of it, and some of the main findings from it, because I know that you will have had a chance to read it already, and I don't want to tell you what you already know. To give some background, we know that education is a priority concern for adoptive families, and they tell us this repeatedly in surveys that we do, and we go out to adoptive families more than once a year to ask them questions about how things are going. The Adoption Barometer last year, which was a survey of over 3,500 adoptive families representing more than 4,000 adopted children, showed that the children that are adopted are significantly more likely to have special educational needs and disabilities, particularly social, emotional and mental health needs. We saw high prevalence of ASD and ADHD, considerably higher than the national average, and we know that adopted and previously looked after young children are at risk of exclusion. When we look at older children, we see that in the 16 to 25 age group, there's a high prevalence of young people accessing mental health services. So 39% of the young people represented in last year's Adoption Barometer had accessed mental health services in that single year. And again, in that year, those represented in the survey were twice as likely to be not in education, employment or training as their peers. So that sets the scene for why it is that we continue to ask adopted parents and adopted people about their experiences of education. It is such a high priority for them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining where this comes from, but I think it's important to understand that the context of this is in the adverse childhood experiences that all actually care experience young children have experienced. So we know that adopted young people, 75% of them will have experienced neglect and abuse in their earlier lives. All of them will have experienced the loss of their birth families, and then most likely the loss of one or more foster families after that. And we know that this can have significant long-term impacts both on physiological development, cognitive development, and social and emotional development, and that these impacts don't go away when the child is taken to a new family. So although we can look at children who've been adopted or previously in care and see that they're in a safe family where they're well nurtured and looked after, the impact of the adverse childhood experiences from earlier in their lives continues to be an issue throughout the lifespan. The impact of this, when we ask parents, is that the overwhelming majority of parents believe that the child's adverse experiences have impacted not only their academic attainment, and we know that previously looked after children achieve considerably less well than their peers in statutory examinations. The DFE provide experimental statistics on that, but also on their ability to cope in education socially and emotionally. And the research evidence is really clear that when young people's well-being is catered for and maintained and supported, their motivation and commitment and perseverance in education increases. And so we find that you can have a virtuous circle of well-being and attainment, where young people whose well-being is supported have more resilience to approach their studies, more willing to take risks, more willing to try something difficult. They're then more likely to succeed, and the bonus of that success in itself increases their well-being and future resilience for future tasks. So the difficulty of young people in social and emotional circumstances also has a negative impact on attainment, because when young people's well-being is not supported and they don't feel safe, they're not in a position to learn as we would like them to learn. I could say a lot more about that. I could have spoken for the entire meeting about that, but I'm not going to. It's just to give some background to explain why it was that we came to ask adopted young people and adults about their experiences of further education. The statistics on young people that are NEET and young people that access mental health services are what prompted us to really look more closely at this issue of FE. And not only that, but adoptive parents tell us frequently that this is a particular challenging time in their children's lives, and that access to FE can be very difficult, and that sometimes all the best efforts to ensure that the young people have educational experiences beyond school can fall apart at the point of beginning FE. And we wanted to know more about that, and we wanted to know about it from the perspective of the adopted young people and adults involved. So we surveyed care experience and adopted people aged 16 or over. Actually, all the survey respondents were adopted people. And also we case study interviewed 6 adopted young adults. We wanted to get, in their own words, the details and the depth of their story and be able to put human faces to the statistics that we're so often reporting. Now, Chloe, that you'll hear from later, features in the report. She's actually Anna in the report, if you've had a chance to read that. so you'll already know something of her story. And we found a number of interesting findings, but I'm going to pick out 5 and very briefly run over 5 what I consider to be significant findings from the report. The first one was the strength of feeling of the respondents and the case study interviewees about how difficult they had found their school experiences, that the foundation in their primary and secondary schooling had not set them up to succeed at further and higher education. 91% of under 25s in the survey felt that they needed more support than their peers at school. Interestingly, when we ask adoptive parents that question, 80% think that their child needs more support. So actually adopted young people seem to have a stronger understanding of their need for support than their own parents did. And this was true of young people who had achieved well academically just as much as it was of those young people who had special educational needs or who had struggled academically. And there's a quote here on this slide from one young person: "Because I was classed as academically able, my attachment-based needs were never considered." And it just highlights the importance of supporting young people's well-being, even if their academic attainment is reaching the standard that we might expect. The difficulties that young people experience in school are a contributory factor, I think, to this next statistic. And this came across really clearly in the case studies, that time and time again, I spoke to young people who had had such a difficult time through school that when it came to the possibility of 2 more years of education, they didn't really want to do it. One young man told me, "I was just done with it. I was just done with education and done with school, and I just didn't really want to do any more." Now, that young man, I think it was Ethan in the report, he did attempt to enrol at college, but didn't manage to successfully enrol in any college. He was just overwhelmed by what was on offer. And in fact, more than half of the young people in the survey said they didn't actually want to stay on at college after they finished their GCSEs at 16. So we're bringing into further education a cohort of people who have struggled at school, who may have felt that they've lacked the support that they've needed, and unfortunately in quite a lot of cases don't necessarily want to be there and don't have a clear idea about what they want to do. When we asked young people why they had chosen the courses they'd chosen, the majority of them didn't choose a course that was based on their career aspirations or goals. They chose a course that was based on expediency, or their friends were doing it, or it was the only one that was available to them. The second issue that arises is to do with choosing and applying. So the majority of young people felt that they needed a lot of support to choose a course, and they needed a lot of support to apply for that course, and that the support that they needed wasn't necessarily there. One mum spoke to us about how her son, because he had special educational needs, got additional career support. But it didn't help, because although the career support person was excellent and very good, the range of courses on offer were pretty much the same everywhere, and none of them were suitable for her son. So even though the careers advice was offered, the range of courses, and importantly the range of settings, is not always available for young people to make a choice that would really be suitable for them. And when I speak about settings, and we will talk about the experience of being at college in a moment, there's a huge challenge for young people transitioning from a secondary school where they're probably known and where they probably know most people, to a large impersonal college setting, which might be enormously geographically widespread, lots of buildings to contend with, lots of open spaces, lots of unstructured time to deal with. So it's not only the range of courses that were difficult to navigate, it was also finding a setting where the young person felt that they could settle in and feel like they belonged to part of the college community. So yes, coping with college life was a significant challenge. More than half of all survey respondents of all ages said that they found the college environment overwhelming and even threatening. They spoke about problems with hypervigilance, that there was a lot of noise and hustle and bustle, and this was very distracting and actually frightening. One of our case studies, Sarah, who went to a grammar school and was very academically able and actually did go on to higher education and become a graduate, she spoke about in her early experience at college of witnessing a fight in the canteen, which absolutely terrified her, because it brought back very clear memories of things that had happened in her early childhood. And she spoke very movingly about how difficult it was to find the right support when academically she was able, but socially and emotionally she wasn't really coping with the college environment. So coping with college life is a significant factor. And we'll see from this graphic that there's quite a difference in approach between those who enrolled straight from school, who were in orange, we're calling them early enrollers. So these are young people who enrolled as soon as they finished the GCSEs, they went straight into college or sixth form. And then those in purple who enrolled more than a year after finishing school. And you'll see that those who came to college later, and some of those had tried once and then come back to it, but those who came to college later, just in general, had more confidence and more positivity about approaching the college experience. And this is particularly noticeable in the statistics about whether they found the college environment overwhelming. The younger enrollers who enrolled straight from school were significantly more likely to find the college environment overwhelming for them, whereas those who came to it later in life were much more able to cope with that college environment. And I think that's something that needs to be taken into account. The age and the developmental stage of the young people that are arriving at college. We may expect a certain level of independence and maturity that, because of their difficult start in life, they may not be developmentally ready to show us yet. But given time, they will be ready. And I think it's extremely interesting that of those who were older than 25 when they completed the survey, 80% of them had gone on to complete university education. So those people who are reflecting so poignantly on how difficult school and college were eventually did go on to be what we would call successes of the education system, but their route to that was often much longer and much more circuitous than it might be for other people. Fourthly, I wanted to talk about personal challenges. I think this is really important. I think it's well recognised that young people that we categorise as care leavers will have a range of significant personal challenges, and there is support in place for that. I think for previously looked after children, whatever the legal status is, that may not be quite so well recognised. So 2/3 of all survey respondents of all ages said that they felt they had things going on in their lives that made it difficult for them to commit to their studies while at further education. One young woman told us about how she became a kinship carer for her relative's child. We see that young people are at this time coming to terms with a complex life history. It may be a time when they begin therapy on a new level. Our case study, Sarah, spoke about how she had therapy every Monday and she felt continual under pressure to explain why she wasn't in college on Monday and she didn't want to tell people about it. We know from research that the teenage years is the time when it's most likely that adopted and previously looked after young people will make contact with their family members that they may not have seen or had any contact with since they were very, very young. Several of our respondents spoke quite movingly about that. We also know that that mental health difficulties and mental health challenges can become more prevalent in this age group. Not only are these young people experiencing the challenges that adolescence brings, but they're experiencing it with additional layers of complex life history, managing the impact of trauma, maybe undergoing therapy. And this is at a time when young people are transitioning from services that are aimed at children and adolescents to services that are aimed at adults. And sometimes young people can fall through the gaps when the thresholds for these services are quite different. So at a time when young people perhaps need more support than they've ever needed before, unfortunately, sometimes the support that used to be available to them is beginning to drop off and is no longer available. And finally, to mention support, this is a really important theme that came out of what the young people and adults said, was the difficulties that they had in accessing the support. So first of all, whether there was any relevant support available to them, they weren't always clear on that. And second of all, how they would go about accessing that support. A lot of young people spoke about the difficulty that they had in being proactive themselves to go and ask an adult, maybe a stranger, for help with mental health or social and emotional issues. This was difficult and delicate and sensitive. And more than one respondent spoke about how important they thought it would have been to have had an adult proactively seeking to support them, rather than them being in the position of having to proactively seek out that support from another adult. There's also a question around whether some young people are ready for the independence that college life expects of them. A couple of respondents spoke about how their parents wanted to be more supportive, but the attitude of the college was more like, well, you are young people that are going towards independence and we prefer to deal with you on that level. And some of the young people were not ready for that level of independence, actually, and found that very difficult. And I think one thing that's worth mentioning is that of all ages, there were quite a few comments from adopted young people saying that they were not confident that it was safe to reveal their adoptive status, that they were not confident that people would react positively to that. And actually, we know from surveying younger adopted people in previous studies, you'll find this in our report Bridging the Gap, that a considerable number of adopted children, more than half, experience bullying or teasing at school related to their adoptive status. So this can have a long-term legacy that they are concerned about, and telling people what their status is and seeking help on the basis of that. What's the net result of this? Well, those who completed our survey, 30% who enrolled within 1 year did not complete their college course, which is a huge dropout rate and a terrible, terrible missed opportunity. When we look at those more confident, slightly older adopted people who enrolled more than 1 year after finishing school, the dropout rate was down to 18%. So we can see that a lot of changes are taking place in young people's lives during this time. And certainly, given more time and more opportunity, some young people are more able to make a success of further education. I'm going to leave you with a summary of the survey recommendations. Really, they cover the main things that I've spoken about. We need to try to lay good foundations in schools to give young people the very best chance of arriving at further education, both academically and socially and emotionally supported, to be able to take up the opportunity that's on offer. We need to think about how we're transitioning young people to further education and what the range of options are for them, if there really are a range of suitable options for all young people to access further education and training. We need to speak about mandatory training in relevant areas for staff members, and the possibility of some kind of designated support system that proactively seeks to support young people rather than expecting them to seek out the support themselves. And finally, really, I've brought you a survey of adopted young people, and this is a glimpse into the lives and the experiences that they wanted to share with us. But actually, we need quality data to understand what the real picture is and to drive improvement. And so in the same way that we've begun to collect data at school level, which is proving extremely valuable, we would look to want to collect that same data at further education level and beyond, so that we can understand the real picture of what's happening with previously looked after and adopted children, and ensure that any policy decisions made going forward are based on the reality of what's happening out there. And I want to just leave on a positive note. There is much that was good about what young people had to say. Many particularly highlighted supportive tutors that went above and beyond, and that really made the difference between them dropping out of the course and actually staying the course. And there's a little quote from one here: the tutors really helped to get me through and pass the course even when I was very anxious. And so much of what is important is rooted in the relationships between the young people and those who will teach and support them. And that kind of stuff costs nothing, and it makes an enormous difference in the lives of young people. Thank you.